Good morning, guys. Welcome to Talk Tuesday. Are we on number 6?
Yes.
Yeah.
6. Talk Tuesday number 6. I can't believe it's taken us 6 weeks to get to Zone 2, which is our subject of today. This came around through a few questions that we had on Instagram, and we decided that we could dedicate a whole month to Zone 2, but we'll dedicate one hour of a week to it to help you guys understand a little bit further about what we're looking at with Zone 2, how it's applicable with your training, and why it is the most important part of your endurance training. It's a term used a lot that not many people fully understand what they're saying when they say it. You'll hear us talking about it all the time, and today we will share with you, we'll answer some questions that you guys have sent in, but we'll also share with you some further details around Zone 2 or aerobic training, which is what it really means. So we had in some questions, 4 main questions that we picked out that we thought were best to answer. I have the first question to answer to you guys, so obviously get prepared for some slides.
Naturally.
It's going to be a long one.
The question, settle down. The question asked to me was, does zoning differ between disciplines? Now, it's a very good question. Basically, I think it comes from a point of, is my running heart rate zones the same as cycling heart rate zones, and maybe a little bit of rowing as well? So I'm going to cover this in 3 main areas to look at. The first one is around what we can expect to see in a difference between our heart rates with running and cycling, because to understand that will help you understand whether your zones will differ a little bit or not. We usually see with a max heart rate test between, say, the same athlete, if they do a max heart rate test in running and a max heart rate test in cycling, you'll normally see around 6 to 10 beats higher in running. In cycling, however, you usually lower than in running in terms of relative to max heart rate. So lactate threshold, LT means lactate threshold. And this is lower as a consequence of a lower max heart rate as well. With runners, that tends to change a little bit with trained and untrained as well, but we're going to go into that in a minute. So the reason we see a higher max heart rate, we'll go on to in a little bit, but basically it's because within running, you're using more muscles. So the muscles of the body require more blood to use. So that's how they get their oxygen, their fuel to be able to move you. And on cycling, obviously you're on a bike that is moving you forward. So you don't have to work as hard, or you can't work as hard because you can't recruit as much muscle. So if we think about that across other disciplines, such as maybe rowing, where you're using your whole body, so therefore you probably will hit a similar max heart rate as you would within running. You could look at something like weight training. You likely, with weight training, your muscle is going to fatigue before you can actually get to the point where you need to recruit more muscle in order to get your heart rate up to a higher point. So the actual strength of the muscle will be the limiting factor for you before you can get your heart rate up to be as high as it would when you were, say, running. However, if you look at something like burpees, then you're using a whole body movement again, and it's a body weight. So if you're relatively fit, you can probably hit a similar max heart rate as you would with something like running. But let's bring it back to what we're looking at mainly with endurance, is the difference between running and cycling. You're normally going to see a higher heart rate with a runner, and therefore lactate threshold in relative terms is going to be lower in cycling. If we move forward to looking at trained athletes versus untrained athletes, this legend at the bottom here, I use him as much as I can in slides because I think it's just awesome. It's just the socks and stocks as well. Like, he's gone full gas.
Socks and stocks.
So, just to make you clear, this is my untrained individual, and this guy up top, Mr. Jan Frodeno, is my trained individual. Now, if we looked at Jan Frodeno's heart rate data, maybe one day he'll let me look at it, who knows, his cycling heart rate data is probably very close to his running heart rate data. This is because he is an expert in both. So he is really, really efficient at cycling, and he's really, really efficient at running. I probably haven't mentioned swimming yet. Swimming is a different story. We tend not to use heart rate within swimming. There's a response the body has naturally to water, which is to basically conserve energy. And so when we get into a pool, our heart rate tends to be shunted, so it goes automatically lower. And this is just an automatic response, much like newborns have. They know not to breathe within water. There's something about the human body being submerged in water that lowers your heart rate. So back to my untrained individual down here. I don't know what his name is, need to look into that. But obviously he's a top cyclist, like he's full gas cyclist. So his heart rate data is decent there, but he doesn't look like much of a runner because he's got stocks on. I'm sure if he stuck some trainers on and found a downhill, he'd be solid, but he's not much of a runner. So his heart rate data for running, so he probably can hit a higher max heart rate in cycling than he can in running, because his muscles obviously are catered towards cycling and not for running. So like we're going back to that weight training analogy, his muscles would give up before he could get his heart rate high enough to hit his max potential heart rate for running, or maybe he's going to snap a knee or Achilles or something. Whereas cycling, he's efficient enough to work his muscles in a way that will be able to demand enough blood in order to put your heart rate into a pumping mechanism to deliver as much oxygen as he needs to those muscles. So again, his zones, if we were to break his zones down, would be very different between his run zones and his bike zones. For old Jan up here, his zones are probably very similar because he's so efficient in both disciplines. So this is something we look at when new athletes are coming on board, is what their training history is. So if runners are coming into triathlon, we can't use their running zones for their cycling because they might not be very good at cycling yet. So we would look to basically define those zones through two separate tests. Whereas if someone comes on who's maybe quite an established triathlete already, we can pretty much assume that their running zones or their bike zones are going to be similar. So we can use that heart rate data for both. The reason we know this is because, max heart rate tests are not easy to do. They're maximal tests. If you've ever done a heart rate, like a VO2 max test or a maximal heart rate test, you'll know that they're horrible. And so when you ask an athlete to go through a max heart rate run test followed by a max heart rate bike test, you normally get met with some pushback. And so it got started to be looked into as how much can we trust one data set to the other? And the answer is, in trained, close; in untrained, you can't. So that's why some of you get both sets of tests and why some of you would only get one type of test. The next thing we're looking at is factors that affect your heart rate data. So the zoning, basically all heart rate data is what defines your zone. So that's why it's really important to be looking at. Now I've got these broken up into central and peripheral. Central being what is directly influenced within your body. So we're looking at ventilatory kinematics. That's a great word to say. So that is how your lungs are set up in order to take in oxygen. So kinematics, movement; ventilatory is obviously breathing in oxygen and your lung mechanisms working. Now you might be thinking, how does that matter? Well, think about the position that you get into on a bike. Your elbows get tucked in around your rib cage. You close your rib cage off. You then lean forward, which pushes the stomach up into your diaphragm, which closes up that space within your lungs. So it's harder to get oxygen in. You can become very, very efficient at it. And if you see the top cyclist guys, they have massive lung capacity because they've gotten used to that position and they've gotten used to breathing in, sucking in that oxygen in order to keep their muscles fueled. So that's a huge part. And if you think about in running, you're a little bit more open, you're more upright. However, if you twist a lot when you run, now you're squeezing that oxygen out and you're affecting the movement of your lungs a little bit differently as well. So more trained runners are able to keep their rib cage more stable. This is why we do different drills that stop you rotating. This is why anti-rotational work within running is really, really important, because it's a big factor to how much oxygen you can get into your body. Muscle tissue is another one, and this is one of the key things around zone 2, is zone 2 maximizes your slow twitch muscle fiber utilization. So when you're training zone 2, your slow twitch muscle fibers, they're more dense in mitochondria, which means that you are creating more powerhouse to the cells in order to utilize oxygen. So they're the key defining factor to endurance. And you're also building what they call oxidative enzymes, which are enzymes that can actually use oxygen and take away lactate acid. So we're going to talk about lactate threshold in a few weeks' time, but essentially the lactate threshold is when lactate in the blood is being made faster than it can be taken away. Within zone 2, we're practicing basically taking away that lactate acid without producing too much that it can't keep on top of it. So you're being able to, when you're training more zone 2, you're building the foundation, the building blocks, which is why it's called foundational training or base training, in order for your body to do that. So when it gets hard, it can keep working for longer. Yeah. Also, muscle recruitment is a central part to the system, and that is basically, this is why you do, again, run drills, this is why you do strides, this is why you do strength training, because in order to utilize the full muscle of the body, you need to be able to recruit that muscle. We use the term switched off a lot. So your muscles are, your glutes are switched off, you need to switch them on. Your core's switched off, you need to switch it on. This is what we mean by muscle recruitment. That's a central part to you in utilizing your endurance capacity of the body. This also plays into a fact within max heart rate testing, is sometimes you can't actually recruit enough muscle in order to keep you going. So this ties back into the difference between cycling and running. Is within cycling, you're pretty much your whole body, your upper body, isn't being used as much as when you are running or say rowing. Therefore, you're just using less muscles. So again, we require less energy demand to those muscles, and therefore you're going to have a lower heart rate. Peripheral is what's going on around us. So within a max heart rate test or any type of test, you're always thinking, you're always doing safety checks. You might not feel like you are, but you are. So you're thinking around your safety, you're thinking around, have you done one before? Have you fallen off a turbo trainer before? Therefore, you don't really want to push max effort. If you're on a treadmill and you're doing a VO2 max test, if they're good at what they do, you'll have a safety harness on with a clip going up above your head. So if you collapse, the clip automatically pulls down on the safety rope, which switches off the treadmill. That can feel really odd if you're doing max tests to begin with and you've not done it before. But then once you get more used to them, you can trust it a little bit more. And then you can basically push harder because you trust the equipment that you're on. If you don't trust it, you won't push as hard. Your equipment could define it. So if you're on a really rocky turbo trainer and you don't want to go to max effort, again, because you might fall off, then you might not trust it to push to your max. Same with the treadmill. If the treadmill's creaking, squeaking, all that sort of thing, then you're not going to push to your max effort. And coordination, meaning if you put a runner on a bike, then they're not going to reach a max heart rate that they would if they were to run, because they're just not as confident with the movement efficiency. They're not as coordinated with the movement. Put a rower into a run situation and he might not hit the same max heart rate as he would when he's rowing. So that's why zoning does differ between disciplines. And at the high end, you can assume if you're efficient in the sport, so say this was cycling and he was a rower and he was a runner, all three disciplines, you could assume that his max heart rate and therefore his zoning system would be the same. In your untrained, maybe because he's a really good cyclist like our man here, but he's not a runner, he's not a rower, you'd have to define those zones differently for his disciplines. So as all good answers in endurance sport questions, it depends, and they're the factors of why.
That was detailed. Very good.
Next. Is it George Crew?
George Crew.
Morning. Okay, guys. So, my question was, and I don't know who it actually came from, but is there a minimum time to spend in zone 2 for it to be effective? So I did a bit of scrubbing up last night, and basically with for running for zone 2 to actually be effective or to have any positive benefit on your body, if it was for the average Joe who's untrained, then research shows that a minimum of 30 minutes. However, for us guys and everyone in this group, it doesn't really occur like that. So basically, it depends on what you're training for. Like, it all depends. Like Tom just said, as all good answers in sport, it all depends. And obviously, for someone like Rob, for example, who's going to be training for long single-stage, multi-stage ultras, doing 60 minutes of aerobic training, zone 2 training is not going to be that effective for him. Whereas for me, who I'm aiming for shorter distance, say, for example, a 5K road race, it's not really that beneficial or effective for me to go and waste loads of energy doing a 3-hour zone 2 run. So it all depends. But all in all, basically, you'll probably find most of your training is split down to the 80-20 rule, which would be 80% zone 2 training, and then 20% will be zone 3, zone 4 training. That can be, so basically math. So 180 minus your age, or zone 2. Whichever comes in your lactic threshold test. That's basically it for zone 2. So yeah, minimum for the average Joe, 30 minutes for it actually to benefit you. But for us guys and for people who are actually training for races and things, it all depends on your distance, so what you want to do in your sport. I'm not going to really benefit much for going for a 2-hour cycle. I would benefit much more going for a 2-hour run in zone 2.
Lovely. Rob Jones.
Tidy.
So my question is, or was, what is the best zone 2 workout for half marathon training? Love this question. Well, first of all, you've got to have, I would say for the guys, I'm looking at who is in on here, and most of you guys are all our athletes. So this is good. So first of all, the first thing to look at is having a really good endurance base. You need a really good base of aerobic fitness. And depending on how fast you're going to go, the half marathon is an interesting event because your pace should be just below your lactate threshold, which is the point where the lactic acid builds up and exceeds the ability for your body to remove it. Generally speaking, that's sort of your 60-minute pace mark. And if you look at the pros, they'll be working just below that pace because they're doing it in just under 60 minutes. It's obviously a race that needs a little bit more restraint than a balls to the wall 10K, but you need a little less restraint than the start of a marathon. So there's a delicate balance that you need to practice. And I think the key for this is going to be building that aerobic base at the start. So maybe 10, 12 weeks, getting that aerobic threshold, raising it, building in some leg speed, things like really long, slow runs, tempo work, so 1K repeats, perhaps at your 10-kilometer pace. And then once you've got that really solid base, you need to be practicing those half marathon intervals. So get that half marathon pace and practice that pace at 1K, 2K repeats. I think though, the best bang for your buck in this scenario, if I was just to pick one sort of workout, would be looking at steady state runs. So that's somewhere between easy and tempo. Most people will do these runs too hard, and they're designed to be aerobic runs. So think your marathon pace, and you build up that mileage each week. So you might start with a really, really easy warm up. Then you run at marathon pace for 2 or 3 kilometers. Next week, you run it for 5 kilometers. The next week, you might run it for 7, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not a super, super easy run, but you shouldn't finish it feeling completely fatigued. You're just working at that higher end aerobic zone, which is going to be much more beneficial when you get to the half marathon and you're pushing yourself super hard.
Solid.
Not bad for 4:30.
Not bad for 4:30. You can string a sentence together. Actually, just working out,
Yeah, I slept on the sofa bed.
Dedication to Talk Tuesday. Okay, so my question follows on quite nicely from what the guys are talking about. So zone 2 training, how to get the most out of it, how much of it, and the best workouts for it. So I'm going to talk about efficiency factor. That was the question that was asked. Basically, what is it? Because I mentioned it in my video and people asked, what is it? It's basically the normalized power. So that's on a bike. That's your power, which is taking away all the chaff. So that's the actual time you're pedaling for 60 minutes or an hour and 20, and how much power you put out for that. So if you pedal outside in Alcudra, or like, actually that's a terrible example. Let's choose something a little bit more rolling. So up a hill, down a hill, up a hill, down a hill. You're not pedaling consistently for the whole time. So normalized power basically takes your average power and takes out the rubbish. So it's a more accurate representation of what you've actually been running. And then normalized graded pace. So that's for cycling. Then for graded pace, it's the same concept, but for running. And what does there? So that's your output. So that's what you're generating. And then the average heart rate is your input. So how much effort you're putting into creating this. We divide the two, and basically that gives you your efficiency factor. So that's how much, well, a couple of things are going to happen here. Either you maintain that same output, so your pace or your power stays the same and your heart rate sticks to that number, or it goes away or decouples, which I'll come on to later, or your output stays the same, so your heart rate stays the same, but your pace or your power drops off. That can be seen in a MAF heart rate test, which is quite interesting because that's aerobic threshold. So that's efficiency factor, basically, in a nutshell. It's how efficient you are at using oxygen at a certain pace. Now, a couple of things to consider here is that these sessions have to be pretty consistent. They have to be aerobic. Firstly, you can't really judge this over, like I say, a super high interval session. So like 1 minute on, 1 minute off. It has to be long, steady blocks so you can compare, okay? That's a pretty high prerequisite. And what you can do with this data is that you can track it. In Training Peaks, you get a little thing that says efficiency factor. Now, efficiency factor is, or just EF on your chart, and you can track it. So you take the same workout each week or every couple of weeks, and you repeat it, and then you can track, or similar ones, so you can track what it goes. So, for example, Jeff, not our Jeff, just any Jeff, trains at aerobic threshold for 60 minutes, and his efficiency factor is 1.41. So his output divided by input equals 1.41. That's a number, great. What do you do with it? Week in, week out, what you're going to expect is that to increase as your fitness increases, your aerobic fitness increases. And then say to get to about 1.55, and then it stabilizes there. This is an indicator that you've adapted to these changes, or this load that you've generated, and you have to adapt and increase it or move on to the next phase of your training. It's quite a nice indicator for, number one, are you training efficiently? Are you training aerobically? Are you aerobically fit? And are you ready to move on to your next one? I just want to lastly talk about aerobic decoupling. So I talked about efficiency factor being the whole session. So how much your heart rate or your power differentiates between the two throughout the entire session. Decoupling basically just takes your efficiency factor from the first half and it divides it by the second half, and then you work out a percentage change. So if I'm going to go on a 60-minute run, and for the first half of my run, my heart rate's at 160 beats a minute, and my pace is 3 minutes 45 per kilometer. In the second half, my pace stays at 3:45 per kilometer, but it increases to around about 165. My percentage change is going to be quite significant, which means that my percentage of power to heart rate is going to go up, or my normalized graded power running to heart rate is going to go up, and it'll be over 5%. Typically, to make sure that you're running aerobically or cycling aerobically, it should be 5% or less. So you can find that on your Training Peaks as well. So after each session, you can, if you want to delve into the data, just those numbers are quite nice to pull out. Your coach should be doing it anyway, to have a look if you're training properly and if you're improving. With heart rate, it's important to note that a lot of things can affect heart rate. So caffeine, how much? So I've had a whole vat of coffee this morning, so I'm pretty hyped up. So my heart rate's naturally higher than it would be, say, if I wake up and just go for a run. And then if I am very tired, it's going to be affected as well, and its response to exercise isn't going to be as good. If I've done my warm up or I haven't, that affects your heart rate. So these sessions to judge these numbers, so efficiency factor and aerobic decoupling, need to be done on a consistent basis. So you wake up, you eat the same, you slept the same, you drank the same, yada, yada, yada. So the consistency of that exercise prescription is pretty essential. Basically, if you want to know more about it, just message me, because it's quite fun to track, and your coaches should be doing it anyway. But it's a really good marker of how much you are improving or training specifically for aerobic capacity, and if you need to move on to the next level.
Awesome. We have a great question in from Jeff, which is really suited to the times we're at now. Humidity was getting higher this morning. By what kind of percent does this affect heart rate or zones? I guess it depends, but what does the data show? It definitely does depend, and the range of data is, it can go anywhere from, you probably see from minimum around 3%, but it can go up to 10% different between your heart rate zones. And this is where actually feeling what zone 2 is so key. You'll notice, probably those of you who've been with us a while, when it gets to summer, we kind of get rid of heart rate data for you guys because it can be really, really frustrating. You go out for a run and immediately just even walking puts your heart rate way above what your zone 2 is. So we tend to go more around how it feels, and zone 2 should feel very comfortable. It should be anywhere from a 3 up to about a 6 out of 10 RPE. You should feel like it's a conversational pace. You can have a conversation at any time, and that you're never really in trouble, basically, is how it should feel. So as summer starts to come and temperatures start to rise, if you're going out and running and you're constantly looking at your heart rate data and it's always consistently high, then just question yourself, how do I feel? What's the deal here? Your coach might have given you a specific heart rate data to work in. Maybe they want to track a certain zone, or they want to track a certain number, in which case you need to just not be a victim to your ego, and so slow down and put yourself in that heart rate zone, because the heart rate is the goal of the session, not your pace. If it's go out at a pacing, so more of a zone 2 pace, then you can ignore heart rate while it's so hot and just run to that pace. If they say just go out on feel, then I would ignore the data and just go on feel. It's so hard in heat. Your body reacts so differently. Think about what Rob just said around what happens when you have like caffeine, or if something is a little bit different in your day. If you read an email before you go out, what that can do to your heart rate. It's very similar with heat. It can affect you in all sorts of different matters. Plus, if you've been exercising the day before, dehydration will really affect your heart rate zones as well. I hope that answers that one, Jeff. How defined are the heart rate boundaries? For example, should you aim to be in the middle of zone 2 heart rate to get max zone 2 benefit, or if you are within minimum and maximum zone 2 threshold of the benefit the same? It's another solid question. Boys, feel free to jump in if you feel like you know the answer, or I'll just keep talking. Again, they're set through percentages because your physiological state of your body is always changing. So it depends as well of what what rate zones you're using. So we use the Joe Friel method, which is 85 to 89% of your threshold, and some will call zone 2 just below threshold. So you might just say, okay, keep your heart rate below what your threshold heart rate is, and you won't have, therefore you're not building more lactate than taking away, so you're still aerobic. So that really does depend. Foster's, we got something to add. I muted you because your background noise is horrendous.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, it's gone now. It's all right.
So yeah, your zone 2 is, it can change. And we've also got that little bit of leeway that maybe you can track fitness, because before you were running whatever 5:30 pace on a flat course at the top of zone 2, now you're running 5:30k pace on a flat course at the bottom of zone 2. So you've seen a shift there, which is more likely, as we said, to be seen in untrained individuals rather than trained. Next question, Miranda. I want to buy a proper mask to run in, but most of them are for altitude training. I assume this will affect my training. Any suggestions of masks to buy? Great zone 2 question, Miranda.
I went for a run yesterday, and my face mask got so sweaty. It was basically like I was basically choking myself to death. It was lovely. I would like some recommendations.
Advise with those altitude masks, because I used to have one and I gave it away, but they have the little valves, and you can actually take it out and remove the valve and then put it back in, so it's still going to be protective, but you're breathing, you won't notice that much difference. It might even be better than a full face mask because you actually have a valve. So if you can get hold of one, just get one. Remove the little plastic, I think they will have 2 or 3, and you can remove the valve. It's like a little piece, looks a bit like a cardboard piece. Remove that out, put the thing back in, and then it's just like a vent. That might help.
Actually, you can really rant about altitude masks, but Rob, you talk first.
I want to chip in about the heart rate zones. Something that happened to me yesterday, and actually something that me and you talked about with Marcus the other day. Ultimately, you've got to decide as well, if you're going to go out and run, having your RPE, your rate of perceived exertion numbers dialed in is really, really important. I went out yesterday, started doing my easy run, and my heart rate monitor that's meant to track things as accurately as it can do said 205. So for me, I should have died. My heart rate never goes that high. So what do? Do I just stop the run? Do I throw it away? Or do I write the whole session off? No, I just ran on feel because I know how zone 2 feels. I know it should be easy. I should be able to talk to the camera on GoPro. Obviously, I'm in a different scenario with now rolling hills that I'm not used to. So I just held back on the pace a little bit and just made sure that when I finished the run, I felt fresh. So having sort of, if you like, your dial into knowing what zone 2 feels like is really, really good. And you should be doing lots of runs like that. And you do see lots of us do program the zone 2 run based on feel with a faster block based on feel. So run easy and then run a little bit harder and then run easy again.
Yeah.
I think the feedback's massive.
It's a huge factor, especially within, you see a lot of the pros and their training time and their volume. You just wonder how they do it so much. And it's because they're spending so much time in zone 2, if you like, in brackets, but they're not actually riding the whole time, looking at their numbers, looking at their heart rate. They're just riding easy, and it's that easy riding and that volume that builds such a big engine. If you're going out and you're depending on a number to tell you that, it can become quite frustrating at times. So getting used to those feel runs, like Rob said, is going to be so much more beneficial for you. We obviously need the numbers, we need the data in order to help you get the most efficiency from your training, but you don't need those numbers and you don't need the data in order to train. So the less you can rely on those numbers, so that if something does go wrong, maybe in a race, maybe just in training in general, then the more you can continue training without feeling like you're doing the wrong thing or having to stop for whatever reason. And
this is where as well, that when you run with someone, you can get a completely different stimulus than is intended. So again, when I've ran with Skinny Foster, whenever he first arrived, his marathon pace was my tempo pace. So I was not doing an easy zone 2 aerobic run. I was pushing more into my threshold type of pace. And he will attest to this, that I was not very conversational on that morning.
No chat, absolutely nothing.
Chat. So just, if you are running with people, guys, and you want to have an aerobic run, make sure that pace is suited for both parties. Or one of you is going to be disappointed, or one of you is going to be, well, fucked.
Threshold in.
Yeah.
It's got to be agreed beforehand, right? Or choose somebody who's a similar running paces to you.
Perfect, yeah.
And it's always good fun to do the talk test when you're running on your own, because you're just talking to yourself.
One I like to say is, can you say the alphabet in one breath out loud? And if you can,
you would do that. You would do, yeah.
I do, yeah.
I have words in myself.
If you can do that, you're aerobic. And if you can't get to Z in one breath, then you're going too hard.
Solid.
I think we should head to this mask question again.
Go for it.
I think just wearing a buff is fine. Those altitude masks, they're not altitude masks. It's complete bullshit. Altitude masks are extremely expensive, and you only find them in labs because they change the partial pressure of oxygen in the air. So the ones that you're buying online with valves in, they're not altitude masks. They're air restriction masks, meaning that you just get stronger. Yeah, you get stronger breathing muscles. It's not equivalent to being at altitude. So use a buff. You can double fold them if you want 2 layers, and you can still breathe out of it. It stops dust. Obviously, remember to wash it after each run, and you should be absolutely fine. Like Marcus said, loads of police saw him in one, and they've not stopped him. I know a few other people who are using those to run in, and they seem to be fine for it. I wouldn't go out buying expensive altitude masks unless you want to get stronger breathing muscles.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
If I just dive back to Jeff's point in terms of humidity and its effect on heart rate and training zones, I haven't trained that much in humidity, but I know that acclimatization does occur. So would it not be important to keep an eye on this as you progress through the summer? For example, as the humidity rises, your natural response will be your zones will become a little bit skewed. So you best go and feel. But seeing how you acclimatize that and then normalize, and then you can train to your, say, high humidity training zones.
Yeah, I think so. But the problem with humidity is it's hard to measure. So it's not like a temperature where you can say, oh, look, it's 35 degrees today. Like humidity is a little bit harder to get a grasp on, and it can change very quickly through the course of a run. So you can go through pockets of very humid air and pockets of non-humid air. So
it's
I think
like altitude, isn't it?
Yeah, you are right in that you can work to a different zoning level if you can sort of predict what the humidity is going to be like. But generally, you know that in hot weather, because you'll have to shunt blood to other areas of the body in order to keep yourself cool.
Cooling, yeah.
That obviously is going to deliver less blood to the muscles if you work at the same heart rate. So the heart rate has to beat faster in order to deliver the same amount of blood to the muscles in order for them to work, which is why you see the higher heart rate. So,
yeah, and then there's the classic drift as well when you dehydrate super quick because of the fact it's hot. So naturally less blood plasma means that you have to beat higher anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So summer is a really good time to focus on being patient, focus on what a run feels like, not to get annoyed, not to get, stressed out because heart rate zone was meant to be this and it's that. What easy has felt like, and your coach will know the following day because you'll see how recovered you are, or you'll also know as well. So it does take a little bit more of I think they call it poetic license, basically.
Who's they?
People.
Oh yeah, people. Sound.
Any more questions, guys, around zone 2 aerobic training? Amani asks, what exercises can you do to work on breathing through the back of the lungs to help with efficient breathing on a TT bike?
Good question.
Really good question.
Yeah.
I would answer that. It's basically opening up your thoracic spine. So rib cage twisting, shoulder scapular control work. You will get quite good at it with swimming, Amani, because obviously you're doing triathlons. So that overhead position within swimming, you as swimmers tend to be very good at breathing in compromised positions because you are overhead. If you're not watching me right now, I've got my one arm up. So as you lift your arm, your rib cage narrows, and then as you turn to breathe, obviously you have to breathe a little bit harder, plus in a short space of time. So swimmers actually become very good at this. Plus you've been riding a TT bike long enough now that you'll probably become quite efficient at breathing in that position. But if you're finding you're struggling and you know what breathing really hard feels like in running, and you can never seem to hit that within cycling, then you can do like rib cage opener drills. You can do breathing drills with rib cage. You can use something like a breath restrictor and
to increase the muscles.
work on opening your rib cage up. But if you try and think about it when you are in that TT position, how you want to feel is almost like you've got wings on the back of your rib cage and you're just breathing in. And as you're breathing in, they're expanding and then breathing out as well. A lot of the times it's not just breathing in, it's actually expelling the air out. So making sure you breathe all the way out. So closing up that rib cage in order to get a nice full breath all the way back in. It can be a conscious thing to think about.
There's a lot of breathing drills you can do in running as well that help with this. And there's actually runs to breathing you can do to try and increase, what's it called? The total of and gas expelled, which means the more you get out, the easier it goes in. I'll have a look and see if
the more CO2 you're leaving is leaving your body, which is what builds up the lactate in the blood as well.
I was listening to some interesting stuff on lactate the other day.
Soon.
I'll put the link in the bio. Classic.
Good stuff, guys. Any other questions?
Those are good questions.
Yeah, they were pretty focused, eh?
Very good.
Nope. Marcus.
There you go. Marcus, for Zone 2 running, you all know what it feels like. It's easy and fun. I trained for 4 months last year for a race with no heart rate, all on feel. Much fun.
Much fun.
Much fun. And actually,
I trained for a marathon with a Casio.
And actually, training the heat's fantastic because now that it's going to get hot, you know what's going to happen. Everyone's going to go, oh, it was hot. Like, fantastic. Love the heat. You should live in the heat. Well, you do. But all my training for CCC last year was done the big block was done in July in 35 to 40 degrees. And when I then went to the mountains in the cooler air, I felt unstoppable apart from my feet, unfortunately. But cardiovascularly, I was in the best shape of my life.
You also get a real nice passive aerobic effect. So your body's working hard post-training to cool you down. So as long as you keep on top of your hydration and post-fueling nutrition, you're getting a really nice effect as well. So we're getting that on as a bonus from everyone else who's training in cooler conditions. And
to be honest, that was probably the hardest thing about all of that summer training, was to make sure that the calculations were right. Because again, every day, like you said, the humidity can change and that'll affect dehydration so much.
It is a good time to weigh yourself pre and post run so you know what you've actually sweat out. And then because you all know our hydration and energy documents so well, you replace with 1.5 times the fluid that you've lost.
Not just water.
Scoop of glycerin.
Just whack some glycerin in there.
Salty glycerin.
Salty glycerin.
Tasty.
Excellent.
Palatable.
No more questions.
We finally cracked him.
Done it. Next week, tempo.
I thought next week we said we were going to hold a multiple choice test, and then anyone that gets below 80% has to leave.
That's it.
That's a classic. Keep it jovial. Keep it Rob Jones.
Good. Right. We'll call it there then, guys. Thanks you for coming along and listening around Zone 2. Next week, we will cover Zone 3, naturally. Then the week after will be 4, and then maybe we'll do 5 as well.
Oh, I like 5.
Even though we are now allowed back out, guys, for running and, general outside activities, we want to keep these guys up, these Zoom chats going. So we will do as long as we need to, essentially. So a few of you asked, said, thank you for doing these. They've been really good. Well, yeah, we're going to keep doing them and keep the Educate and Inspire series going. So any suggestions that you have, we'd love to have them. Obviously, Talk Tuesdays, we try and make a little bit more informative for you guys. Coffee chats, we're going to see a change a little bit this week. We're going to have our main man, Rickson, coming on to talk about networking and how networking and running has really helped him running has really helped his networking and how it could possibly help you guys as well. And we want Thursdays to become really open to you guys so you guys can network with each other. You don't know how many amazing people are in this community, and we want you guys to be able to share and chat amongst each other for that. And then Sundays we keep as our Sunday session, which is sharing inspiring stories, which maybe gets you guys thinking around some challenges you can do, not always depending on races to go and achieve those goals. You can actually make up your own and sometimes have a little bit of a push in order to do so. So that's the theme of the 3 talks that we do on Zoom. And any suggestions for those guys, we'd love to hear them. Obviously, just give your coach an email or any of us or Skinny, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, or actually, if you want to contribute something, like Rickson's going to do networking and how it's linked to endurance. If you feel like there's anything that you have that you want to share or contribute, just let us know and we can put you in, get you a slot.
I can confirm Surf House is open. I went yesterday for an acai bowl. Just to let you know.
Mate, we're too big. We wouldn't be able to legally fit the social distancing rules. We packed that place out.
30%, 1 in, 1 out.
I'm not saying for coffee chat. I'm just saying in general, we can all breathe again because Surf House is open.
I heard Marcus is going to open up his house for acai bowls at 21 dirhams a pop.
Solid.
Yeah, I heard he's a bit skimpy on the almond butter. He's only got teaspoons. All right, guys, have a great day. Thank you for coming. If I don't see you through the week.